make $100,000 in property in the next 12 months. Now, this strategy is an absolute strategy that doesn't matter what the market is doing. The interest rate could be at 10%. You can still make this money. And the reason I want to tell you this is because so many people right now are looking for the best return on investment. But the thing is, when they're looking at return on investment, you're looking at shares, you're looking at Bitcoin, you're looking at residential, you're looking at commercial, you're looking at businesses, and you're looking for the magic return on investment that does not exist in this market. What you need to do is stick to one strategy, and that strategy works over and over again. How do I know? I have done this strategy over and over again across Australia in different states. Doesn't matter, it's in Victoria, in New South Wales, in Queensland. I have repeated this with countless amount of my clients and my students. My name is Helen Tarrant. I help everyday Australians become wealthy through commercial property. And yes, this is a commercial property strategy. And if you don't know and you want to know, you need to stay tuned all the way to the end, because right now at the end, I'm going to give you a fast track formula. And how do we get $100,000 extra in our property in the next 12 months? Now, if you are buying a property that is going to be $500,000 or $600,000, $100,000 is roughly around 18 to 20% growth of that property. So you're going from $500K to $600K. Right? If you're buying $1 million property, $100,000 is 10%. It's much easier to get $100,000 out of $1 million than 20%, so $100,000 out of $500K. Now, there's a couple of things that's going to be in your way. Number one, it's going to be the level of investment, right? So if you are buying a $500,000 property versus $1 million property, you're going to find that there's going to be so much competition for the $500,000, because let's face it, anyone getting into commercial property can buy a $500,000 property. So if you're buying a $500,000 property, you are competing with everybody out there. And when you're competing with everybody out there, your return's going to be lower, your chances of uplift is going to be lower, and your back end growth is going to be lower as well. So everything is lower. So rather than buy lower, buy up. You should leverage and buy as much or as high price as you can in the commercial property space, because what you want to do, you want to remember that today's expensive is tomorrow's cheap. Right? So today you might be selling an extra 50 or 100K, but tomorrow that 150 or 50K is going to compound itself in terms of that growth, right? And ultimately, how is $100,000 made? It's made partly on the actual cash flow, but the other part is actually the growth component. And is this growth you can finance against? If you do it in commercial property, you absolutely can. If you do it in residential, not so much, right? Because the servicing in commercial property is much, much easier versus servicing in residential. And that is the truth. And that's why so many of you, if you are in your 40s watching this, you've got to start with commercial property now rather than look back to residential. Your residential journey is done by the time you're in your mid-40s. You are now changing to commercial space because you're ready to go into retirement by the time you're 55. Now, there is a blueprint, there is a plan to be able to do that. And if you want to do, just check out the link below. But on another note, now, how do you get that? So let's say now $100,000 and you're putting in $200,000 to buy a $500,000 property, right? Now, $500,000 property with a $200,000 deposit, you're borrowing 65%. And the $200,000 deposit is going to form the deposit plus the cost to buy it, which is the stamp duty and everything else. Now, to make $100K on that, you're making 50% gain on your money. You can't make that in any other market right now, not even in crypto, right? That's not happening, right? Definitely not in business in the first 12 months, unless you're going gangbusters across the world and you're spending heaps of money on the leverage, and you're not going to be able to do it on 200K. If you're buying a $500,000 property, what you need to buy is a property that is probably going to be a metro property, so a property in the city, right? So that's Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Adelaide, probably not so much Tassie, but maybe even in Perth, right? You're going to buy across the state, and that what you're buying is a property that has a undervalued rent. So the tenants are on month-to-month rent, right? So they're not on a set lease. They're on month-to-month. They might have been there for a long time, but on month-to-month, their rent is lower than the market, and they are keen to stay, but they don't want the rent to put up a lot. So you're going to take the advantage of the fact that it's in a month-to-month rent, right? And you are then going to buy this property. Now, firstly, there's a couple of things you need if you're going to buy this property. It's either going to be a no-doc loan for the first 6 months, where they're assuming the lease doesn't exist or is going to be a loan based on you being able to service. If you can't service it, you need to go to a no-doc loan, which is available only in the commercial space where it's not looking at you for servicing, but it still can give you up to 70% for properties in the city and is secured against the property itself. But the interest rate is high. The interest rate is going to be sitting around 3% to 4% higher than what's traditionally the loan. So it's going to be sitting somewhere between 10 to 11%. Now, I treat it as cost of doing business. If you're going to make your 100K, that's just the cost of doing business, an extra $10,000 to $15,000 in terms of interest in that year. Now you buy your $500,000 property. What you do is during the due diligence period, you actually go in and try to renegotiate the lease. You're going to know before you actually go unconditional, tenants stay or the tenants not. If the tenants not stay and you need to talk to 3 to 4 agents to find out what is the market rent. Does the market rent match up? Your market rent needs to go from, say, for example, if you are buying a $500,000 property and your tenant's paying $25K in rent, you need to say that the potential of that rent could be 35, potentially even more. But definitely you need to go from 25 to towards about 35,000 on that $500,000 property for you to make that capital gains to 600K, right? So, and also cash flow, right? Getting $10,000 more, right? From 25,000 to 35,000, right? That's actually quite an incremental jump, right? So 25,000 to 35,000 is not just a 10% increase on rent. It's more like a 40% increase on rent. But you need to see that the tenant's been there, has probably had an older landlord who never really put their rent up. They've been really good tenants for years and years and years, and now it's your time to put onto market rent. The tenant may have a sticky business. That's the type of business I look for. There might be accountants, there might be lawyers, there might be dentists, there might be a chicken shop, there might be a sushi shop, whatever it is. They're sticky. They've got the tenant, they've got their clients coming through as walk past traffic. Most of the time, this is done for retail. It can be done for industrial, although the price of industrial at the moment is high. It can definitely be done for office space. So you're looking at being able to increase that rent. Now, if this tenant decides not to stay, that's fine. You can still buy the property because it's a no-doc loan. And once you buy that property, what you do is you need to set aside from the moment it goes unconditional, hopefully getting a slightly extended extension on the settlement. So maybe a 3-month extension on settlement or potentially even 6 months. And then what you do is you start marketing and finding that tenant. You get a new tenant in, you give them some incentives, and that's all built in on your holding cost. Like there's a formula that I follow, right? And if you want that formula, do click in for that free strategy session where we can share with you how to do that uplift. Now, what you want to do is be able to tweak that so that you get the tenants in, you give them the incentives, they go to 35,000, you sign the lease, you obviously settle on the property within 6 months or 3 months when the incentives are sorted out, or when the incentives are paid out to the tenant, like as in served. So if it's 3 months rent free, you need to go through those 3 months. If it's 6 months, it needs to do that. Then you go back to the bank for revaluation. That's how you go from 500K to 600K. That's how you do it. And that's how you get 20% uplift on your money. Plus you got the additional cash flow from 25K to 35K from settlement, right? That's one trick. That's one way to do it when you're buying a $500,000 property. Now, when you're buying $1 million property, you're trying to get your same 20% or 10%, that 100K, what you do is you need to buy a vacant property. Now, this is the highest risk property there is in the market, is to buy a vacant property. Now, doesn't matter whether that's industrial, doesn't matter whether that's retail, doesn't matter if it's office. Buying vacant is still the highest risk if you're not owner-occupier in the commercial property space. So if you want to avoid that pitfall, you need to get some education. That's where it's fundamental. Taking from residential to commercial doesn't work. It's a particular type of formula. So what that will be you need to buy a property that is vacant in an area of demand, that has already a hub, has foot traffic, that already has infrastructure coming through, right? And that's not just looking at RP data. There's a lot of other ways to do it. So you do that, you buy it vacant, you secure it with a long settlement, the same way that we talked about before when you're buying the $500,000 property. You buy with that longer settlement. Then you start talking to all the agents, you start marketing it. And remember, it's a bare shell. So your incentives are going to be much higher than a property that's 500K already with some fit out. So it's going to be, you've got concrete walls and everything. So you need to make sure you contribute to air conditioning, contribute to, grease traps, contribute to painting, contribute to, bringing it to a warm shell for your tenant. But that can be a contribution in terms of fit out, as in cash, and rent-free period, right? So there's a fine line how to negotiate that. Again, that is covered in our course on Uplift. But if you want to personalize that, if that is a strategy, definitely a conversation, not just a video. So on top of this, what we do is you get the tenant in, you pay the incentives, and you'd have to go and get a no-doc loan unless you've got cash to buy it, or you've got an investor coming in. This is a great joint venture opportunity as well. If you've got a cash partner and a doing partner, buying a vacant commercial property is an excellent way of being able to add value, because as a doing partner, you have the techniques to do it. For example, I have the techniques where I can call investors who can put money in. They'll get a split of the profit at the end, or we give them a certain set of returns once that formula is refined and you've done it a few times, right? So this way, both parties make money and there's low risk for both people, right? So you get a no-doc loan unless you're putting in all cash. And what the whole point is, you need to find out in the market whether a warm shell, which is sort of your ceilings, your floors, and your air cons are going to attract a better tenant versus a vacant premise, right? And you need to obviously do an area study of the type of tenants that goes well in there, and so you can set it up to attract those tenants. Plus, you're going to work out what your rent per square meter is. So the whole idea is that so for you to get into a property, let's say in Metro, right now the benchmark's about 6%, right? And that's doing on a reasonable property. On a good property, it's probably about 5.5%. But on a sort of a good property that has a reasonable lease, you can push it to 6%, right? Now, you want to be able to come out of that by uplifting the rent so that you get about 7.5%, right? And that means that you now have that growth. So what you're going to see is you're going to put $300,000 in or $400,000 in for $1 million purchase, get your no-doc loan, and what the value is, that $1 million is probably going to translate to somewhere around 1.3 million in terms of the value. So you've actually made more than 100K, but if you put in about 400K to buy it, including stamps and everything else, plus some holding costs, you're probably in at 500K in terms of cash, but you're getting potentially after expenses, everything about 250,000 back. So it's about still the 250,000 in return in investment. It is amazing when you're looking at that, and you can do that in actually 12 months. I've done it, my students have, my clients have, and I've done it for my clients. Now, if that is the type of results we are getting right now in the commercial property space, where you can't get it in the residential space, and we're the only company, Unicorn Commercial Property, Helen, Tarrant, that can actually do it, because I understand intrinsically how commercial property is done. Not about the location, is about applying that formula across Australia and looking at suburbs and areas that formula actually works. So if you're wedded to buying next door, next suburb, this formula doesn't work. But if you're wedded to getting the results, then this formula works. So to get that 100K is actually really easy. It's 10% return on typically on the value of the property, or 10% return on the money you've put in, right? So that's kind of, that's the number one rule. Or you might try to get 20% if you're buying a $500,000 property, depending on how the price point is, right? And that changes, right? But I always encourage, the bigger the investment, the bigger returns, right? So you've got to do, these are calculated risks. Thank you very much for staying to the end. I'm going to give you a fast launch formula. So the fast launch formula is that you need to look at where in your area, if you want to be staying in your area or your state, that there is underperforming rents. So there might be an area that's really dirty, really grungy, that looks like it needs to be improved, that nothing's going ahead. What you're looking for is the diamond in the rough. Like, you go to those areas, and so it doesn't matter. Like, if you're in Sydney, you probably will be going to the western suburbs. Like, if you're in Melbourne, you probably be going to the little Melbourne fringes, right? You might go to your Somervilles, you might go to your Hastings, you might go to Tyabs, you might go to the areas that hasn't boomed, like the Mount Marthas or the Peninsula, right? You don't want to go to those areas that's already boomed, the prices come up, right? And the same is when you're in Adelaide, you want to go to the fringe suburbs, right? And in Brisbane, you want to go out, you want to go towards your Ipswich, towards your Toowoomba's. Those are the areas that have still got those growing pains. You want to find growing pains, you want to find little places with the growing pains, and you're looking for a rundown property, not so much the structure of it being terrible, but just the internals and the fact that it is ugly. People cannot get over ugly, right? Go to it, it's got a short lease that's finishing up, the vendor has just slashed its prices because they're desperate to sell it, right? And that's the time you come in. You know your timeline within that 12 months or 18 months, you're going to uplift it with the tenants either going or staying. You're going to work that out with the tenant during that time, or you're going to be able to give them an incentive to stay on longer or an incentive for them to leave so that you can do that refurbish so much sooner. But you're coming in with some guaranteed income that's going to pay your outgoings. Plus, the area in the next 1 to 2 years is going to change because it's to that point where it's gone to the bottom point and the only way is up, right? And that is what you're looking for when you are fast launching. You're looking for those particular characteristics in the area. Then you do your maths of how much rental you can increase by how much incentives and how much refurbishments. And that's when you take advantage, right? Go to where other people aren't looking for the opportunities that other people are missing. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Click the link below to register for a personalized blueprint. But in the meantime, subscribe, hit the bell. See you on the next video.